Hello, Becky here, and today we're going to be looking at how I implemented Footsteps with Wwise into the demo level of Viking Village in Unity. Okay, so first I integrated the Wwise project with the Unity project so that they would communicate with each other. I then went into the FPS controller object and edited the script of the first person controller script in the inspector. Within that, I changed one line of code, and this basically means that the first person controller will reference the Audio Kinetic sound engine instead of the Unity sound engine. So I saved that and then went into Wwise to start importing my footstep sounds. Okay, so first of all I went to Project and Import Audio Files, and I selected my whole footsteps folder, which I'd separated into the different groups of sounds that I have. So I have generic footsteps, which I will play a few of now. So they're not on any specific surface, and I then have other surface sweeteners, so I have dirt, grass, water and wood, so that when these footsteps play, the generic footstep will play, plus the surface sweetener. I also imported bag and key sounds so that you can hear the sound of the person's clothes rustling when they take steps. So next I set up the game syncs, so I set up a switch group for the footsteps and then different switches for each of the different surfaces. So I then went back into the audio tab, into the footstep switch container. I then made sure that this was referencing the footstep switch group in the settings. I then also set the default to dirt so that if in-game you step on a surface that hasn't been registered to a specific surface type, it'll default to dirt. So I then dragged all of the different sound groups that I wanted for each of the different surfaces. So for example for dirt, I dragged over the generic sound, the dirt sweetener, and the bag and key sounds. I then did some mixing for each of the random containers using the master fader, and I mainly turned down the generic footstep because it was too loud and mixed in the bag and the key sounds. I next added pitch and volume randomization for each container to add more variation to the sound. Also, for some of these random containers, I changed this setting here, so the avoid repeating last however many played. For ones where I only had 4 files, I left it at 1, but where I had 5 and 6, I changed it to 2 and 3, just so the same files weren't always being repeated near each other. Also, for the bag and the key sounds, I ended up randomizing the initial delay time, only by a small amount, but this means that every time a footstep happens, the sound won't play immediately, it will play within these values here. Without this, the footsteps could end up sounding too repetitive, so I wanted to add a bit more variation in there. I also wanted to add in twig snapping sounds for the dirt and grass surfaces, but I couldn't actually figure out how to change the probability of these being played, as I didn't want them to play every time the footstep was triggered. I figured out that there was a way to change the weighting for each object inside of the container, but not for the whole container itself. So if you know a way to do this, then please let me know in the comments. Okay, so next I want to get the audio ready to play in Unity. So I created a footstep event, and by selecting this in the event viewer, I dragged in my switch container into this box here so that the event would reference these sounds. So I then went into the sound bank manager and dragged the footstep event into the footstep sound bank that I'd previously created. So now the footstep sound bank contains the event, which in turn contains the footstep switch container. So every time this sound bank is triggered, the footstep sounds will play, depending on the different surface that the user is standing on. So I next generated all my banks, and once that was done, I saved the project and went over into Unity, into the Wwise picker, and refreshed the project. We can now see in the Wwise picker the switches that we made in Wwise that we can now attach to our game objects in Unity. Okay, so to be able to have the game know what surface you're stepping on, I set up a bunch of box colliders that trigger the right footstep surface sound. So I created an empty game object and named it Footstep Colliders to act as a folder for the different surfaces. I then created the other game objects for each terrain types that I wanted. Within these, I then created even more game objects and added a box collider component to each one. I then adjusted the size of each of these boxes using the transform scale values. So I made a few of these around the town that we have here, and for each one I dragged in the correct switch container from the Wwise picker into the game object inspector. So by doing all of that, the different surfaces now play when walking on them in game. And here's how it ended up sounding. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or advice on how to make this more efficient, then let me know in the comments, and feel free to take a look at my other videos on my channel or my website.